After nearly 16 years of hard work, Black Mesa is finally finished and out to the public. And it's kind of amazing that it really happened at all. There's so many examples of these games where people are just like, oh, I'm gonna form a team and remake this game that this AAA studio abandoned years ago. And they always have some interesting concept art or maybe some models or something to show off in the early stages, but it quickly falls apart when there's no money or real direction flowing in. Besides the fact that fan games rarely ever come to fruition, it's pretty rare to see a game that's been in development for so long ever actually come out. I mean, even AAA games may have multi-year dev cycles, but never anything close to 16 years. Anyways, there's a lot of cool things that Black Mesa got right. I wouldn't say it's a perfect game, but it is a really, really good remake of Half-Life 1, and I think it should be kind of the definitive way of experiencing Half-Life 1 in the modern era. If you go back and play Half-Life 1 now, you'll see that it's kind of really dated. You can definitely tell that there was a lot of inspiration at the time. There was a lot of cool stuff happening. Had an interesting kind of vague story going on in the background, even though it was nowhere near as close to the story power that Half-Life 2 had. But for the time, Half-Life 1 was kind of a crowning achievement of games. So it's really cool to see them modernizing this game with not just a graphical remake, but an entire overhaul of everything. I mean, most of the game remakes you'd see recently are pretty much just updated textures, updated models, higher fidelity. Really, that stuff is kind of inconsequential. Sure, most of these remakes look nicer, but they play exactly the same. It's the same game. Meanwhile, you have Black Mesa over here, which basically did everything from the ground up. All the encounters are completely redone. The level layouts may be similar and familiar in some ways, but also have new paths, new puzzles to solve, plenty of new mechanics, especially that are introduced, which definitely spice things up a bit. And one huge part of the game that was basically remade from scratch. If you're at all familiar with Half-Life, then you'd know that I'm talking about Zen. Obviously, this video is going to be very spoiler heavy, as Zen kind of incorporates the very last half of the game in Black Mesa, or in Half-Life it's the last 20 minutes or so? I don't know, it's been so long since I played the original Half-Life. But Zen was just a complete afterthought in Half-Life 1. You can even see Gabe Newell say somewhere in an interview that he really wishes they had more time to perfect Zen and make it into a fully featured world. If you want to play the game completely blind yourself and don't want to see any spoilers, I recommend clicking out of the video now, because I'm gonna jump right into Zen and talk about what makes it so awesome. So right off the bat, Zen is quite a sizable chunk of the game. A couple hours probably on average for most people. There's a ton of new mechanics introduced. There's all these puzzles, there's an alien factory, there's the Vortigaunt city, which was really cool to see in my opinion. Giving you kind of a look inside the Vortigaunts and what goes on in this alien world, instead of just seeing the Vortigaunts in Half-Life 1 and 2 just doing their thing, portaling in from worlds, but never actually getting their own story. I can't say that I loved every single part of it. There was some section where you're going through the alien factory that dragged on for quite a while, but overall Zen was not bad at all, don't get me wrong. Right off the bat, when you get into Zen, it has this awesome introduction, which is not a cinematic or anything, it's just experienced completely in the game. This is a lot more common in AAA games nowadays, where you come to a wide open space and you see basically a cinematic, but not a cinematic. You're just experiencing it firsthand. It's like in Dark Souls, where you come to a new outdoor area that's super wide open and you can see really far in the distance, and there's like a castle or something off in the background. You're like, oh, obviously I'm going to that castle. It'll just take me a while to get there, but there's going to be some big boss battle there and I'm going to have to do a lot of stuff along the way. Just showing you the lay of the land is a really great introduction to Zen, and that's not even talking about the artistic accomplishments happening here. Straight up, it's really nice to look at Zen. It's a very pretty and well-made area. I'd say a lot of the areas in the game definitely look like Source Engine areas, like something that you could find in Half-Life 2, and that's not necessarily bad. I'm not saying they look terrible, but Zen looks like a modern game. A lot of artistic work, time, and effort was put into this area, and it really shows. It's not just one consistent space-looking alien-ish biome. The first half of Zen is very natural, very nature-inspired, very wide open spaces, lots of room to move around, and then the second half of Zen is where you get to more man-made, factory-like. If you're familiar with H.R. Geiger's work, you know, the guy that made Alien, the Alien. He does a lot of kind of fleshy, alien tech mixed with body parts and I guess wet work you can call it. There's a lot of that going on in the second half of Zen, where the factory is not just made of metallic elements, but has this gross, fleshy, bloody, kind of yucky, slimy quality to it. Meanwhile, there's a ton of new puzzles that they introduced in Zen. There's these little explosive, I guess, watermelon type plants that blow up when you shoot them. They're basically explosive barrels, but they're plants. plants. There's like these veins that come out of trees, kind of like tube piping things, and you have to go destroy the plants at the end of them to unlock portions of a door. There are a bunch of water sections, which was not a big thing in Half-Life 1, but those, crazy piranha creatures, they make quite an appearance in this game. There's parts where you're jumping over lily pads that are like sinking and trying not to fall into the water, and then there's these upside down grabber things. They're like upside down barnacles, but they're in the water and they suck you down into the water. And then you get to the part that actually is in Half-Life 1, the battle with the big spider creature. Obviously, much more modernized, a lot more well done. There's ammo and supply drops everywhere. You have a lot of room to move around. And you can use the jetpack type thing that you picked up at the beginning of Zen to get away from him fast or dodge and do all these cool moves. Once you beat the boss, you go into its lair, which is like this cave place. And you're going through, sneaking around there, and then you'll have certain sections where it'll find you and it'll go into this like chase mode. So you're running through, trying to like break cobwebs and stuff to get through without getting caught by the monster. And that's cool. Some of the chase sections work pretty well. Then you get to the final battle with the spider monster, and this is where I kind of lost it. I was playing on hard, and I didn't think the game was too bad. I thought the difficulty was pretty much well set for what they said, hard mode, on a Half-Life game. And then I got to the second fight with this boss, and it was like ridiculous. I think I was fighting him for like an hour straight. That's probably the only major stopping point I had with this game. I don't know, you guys in the comments can tell me if this guy was ridiculously overtuned, or if maybe I just didn't figure him out right. Other than that, I'd say the difficulty of the game is pretty well tuned. If you're familiar with the Half-Life series, definitely give it a play on hard. But that's kind of a tangent. As I mentioned before, the Vortigaunt City was really cool to see. They're just kind of hanging around. I mean, you couldn't explore too much of their houses and stuff, but it's interesting that the furniture and props and all different things in their house are very dated and tribal looking, while at the same time they can run these crazy alien machines that summon monsters and open portals. I'm not exactly sure the extent of their abilities, but it's obviously way beyond humans, so why do they live in like wood and mud huts? Then you get to the big factory section, and I feel like this is where Zen is kind of hitting its low point. There's a long stretch of the game where you're just solving puzzles, which is fine. Some of them are interesting, the solutions are cool to find out. I wouldn't say any of them were super hard, but you're basically going through connecting wires for the most part and solving little puzzles on how to get the wire connectors. And then eventually you get to the upper parts of the factory where you're like going on these boxes, and then they start to bring enemies back in and mix it up with puzzles and enemies interchangeably. This section was okay as well. I would have liked it to be shorter personally, because it definitely does drag like the last section. And then eventually you get to the last section of the game, which is this massive elevator ride. And I would say that this was pretty well done, but similarly to how I felt about the rest of the factory sections, it definitely lasts for a long time. And the entire time, every single floor, or even while you're moving up in between floors, these stupid brain baby aliens, which again, I don't know the name for, but they're really annoying to fight and just constantly pestering you while you're going up on the elevator. It would have been nice if they kind of switched up the enemies in this area and threw in a couple other things, but maybe you guys liked it more than me and thought it was a really great pre-final boss section. And moving on to the final combat segment of the game is the final boss, and this was actually really awesome. If you remember back to Half-Life 1, or even if you don't remember, the final boss was a complete joke. But anyways, it's this baby guy floating in this chamber, and you take these jump pads and shoot into his open head. And I know it wanted to be like this big climactic battle, but it did not feel like it in Half-Life 1. It was just like, oh, that's the end of the game? Here you got like this epic modern boss battle with a ton of different stuff going on. The boss has all these different attacks that I wouldn't say any of them are particularly unfair, because they're pretty telegraphed and you can see things coming. But anyways, I thought this boss battle was really well done. It was super modernized. It was a great climactic end scene to the game. It wasn't incredibly hard, even on the hard difficulty. Everybody who worked on it should be super proud. Besides the fact that Black Mesa is a really good recreation of Half-Life 1, it goes so far beyond that. If you just play everything before Zen as a recreation of Half-Life 1, I think you'll be having a pretty good time with it. The game design is solid, everything looks nice enough, the areas are interesting, the puzzles aren't too hard but still varied. The sound design is nice, all the weapons feel super punchy and nice to use, kind of rewards you for exploration and going off the beaten path. Overall, Black Mesa is great, but on top of that, you have this this completely recreated and fully realized vision of Zen, and this is really the definitive way, I think, to play and experience Half-Life 1. If you don't agree with me, that's totally fine. I can definitely appreciate people who think the original is the original vision of the game and shouldn't go beyond that. If you haven't played Black Mesa yet, go pick it up. Support these guys who have been working hard on it for 16 years. They really deserve it. Will they do Half-Life 2 next? I think it's still kind of too early for that. The technology hasn't advanced far enough where that's really necessary or will be that much of a difference if they remade it right away. But I'm sure they have some other projects they're working on, so it'll be cool to see what they do. If you'd like to hear more of my deep dives on video games and other nerdy stuff, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot and I really appreciate it. Anyways, I will see you guys in the next one.
Time to choose.